Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Eileen Bass, and I'm the Wiseman Interpretation Assistant for the Truth in My Prayer project. Nachina wimapan nemethak. Aho nachina chikaneteki. Eileen eteshith. Nawitho nipen ashigan meshkwaki atoean. Mani withon meshkwaki withon. Kapot nithaki hapen. The Sac and Fox Nation, Oklahoma. Eshitega thawach. Ashowai. Neto ikipen kichni, Great Lakes. Nenamathi thopen. Nemathi thoak, ochipiawak, nemath wimanetoek. Mana maneto, bieto enepi. Memechi kimeko, wihathakechi nemethak iniwechi, eshina math ithoyak. Nechina wimamapen, nemethak. Memechi kimeko, wimen wikamawakwe. Nepi eshitahach nemisho. Nemisho nahithagi atoea epimatethich. Kite pihipwa epe thatowiani. Hello, my relatives. My name is Eileen. We are named Ashigun and Meskwaki. The name is a Meskwaki name. Later we became Sac, the Sac and Fox Nation of Oklahoma, as they are now called. Long ago, we lived near the Great Lakes. We are a fish clan. The Fish Clan people come from the Fish Clan spirit. The spirit brought water. It is important that we have fish. We are related to fish. It is important that we take good care of the water, as my grandfather believed. Water is life. My grandfather spoke Sac when he was alive. Thank you all for listening. This institution will continue by acknowledging that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and the Wiseman Art Museum is located within the traditional homelands of the Dakota Oyate and other communities such as the Menominee, Ho-Chunk, and Ojibwe. It is important for the Wiseman to acknowledge the peoples on whose land they live, learn, and work as they seek to improve and strengthen their relations with the original peoples of Minnesota-Makhoche. Minnesota-Makhoche can be interpreted as the land where the water reflects the sky. This land acknowledgement is just the first step in the long, complex process of reconciling with the colonial legacy of this institution. With this acknowledgement and the ongoing work with the repatriation of the members' cultural materials and the Truth in My Prayer project, WAM affirms their commitment to this process and their continual relationships with Indigenous communities here and elsewhere that the Wiseman's practices are in place. Wana Dakota Wayekte, Makhoche kin Dakota Oyate, Wichaki Chupik Tawachin, Anamaya Hoptampi kin Padamayapi. Now I will speak Dakota. I want the land to be returned to the Dakota people. Thank you for listening. In addition, WAM would like to thank the Art and Martha Kamer Fund and Ameriprise Foundation for supporting our operational budget, as well as individuals like you who contribute to the annual fund. If you feel inspired by today's program, please consider making a gift that's right for you by scanning the QR code in the lobby as you leave. Tonight's program is held in conjunction with the Wiseman's current exhibition, Ebb and Flow, featuring the work of Courtney M. Leonard and her site-specific installation, BREACH Logbook 22 Cull, which examines histories of water and seeks to activate conversations about industrial impacts on water, interspecies connections, climate change, and the shifting relationships between humans and water as informed by the past. After our talk tonight, there will be a Q&A. We want to hear from you and invite you to submit your questions and thoughts to us through Slido. You can test out the tool now by answering the question, how many relationships do you have with water? And now I'm pleased to introduce our panelists for the evening. Courtney M. Leonard, Shinnecock, born 1980, is an artist and filmmaker who has contributed to the offshore art movement. Leonard's current work embodies the multiple definitions of BREACH, an exploration and documentation of historical ties to water, whale, and material sustainability. In collaboration with national and international museums, cultural institutions, and Indigenous communities in North America, New Zealand, Nova Scotia, and the United States embassies, Leonard's practice investigates narratives of cultural viability as a reflection of environmental record. Leonard's work is in the permanent public collections of the United States Art and Embassies, the Crocker Art Museum, the Heard Museum, ASU's Art Museum and Ceramic Research Center, the Peabody Essex Museum, the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art, the Museum of the North, the Mystic Seaport Museum, and the Pomona Museum of Art. Dr. Kate Beane, Flanders Santee Sioux Dakota and Muskogee Creek, holds a PhD in American Studies from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. She is the executive director of the Minnesota Museum of American Art and serves as adjunct faculty in American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota. She is vice chair of the board for Vision Maker Media, a national organization based out of Nebraska, chair of the board for Wakan Tipi, Owayangapi in St. Paul, and Minijaska, and in 2020 was appointed by Governor Walz to serve on the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board, which oversees Capitol Complex preservation and development, including public art, in downtown St. Paul. Previously, Kate served on the leadership team at the Minnesota Historical Team, where she was the director of Native American initiatives, engaging with both Native communities and tribes and advocating for and implementing Indigenous interpretation and involvement at historic sites throughout the state. In 2018, Kate and her father, Sid Beane, completed a documentary film, Ohiesa, The Soul of an Indian, which shares the story of her grandfather, writer, reformer, and physician Charles A. Eastman. And in 2019, she presented a Minneapolis TEDx talk titled The Lasting Legacy of Place Names, which spoke to her family's work restoring the Dakota name to B'dai-Makaska in South Minneapolis, B'daiota. Our moderator is Dr. Roxanne Biidabinokwe Gould, Gichukwendak, and Anishinaabe. She is a professor emerita of Indigenous Education and Environmental Studies at the University of Minnesota Duluth. Her work includes projects and research throughout the Indigenous world with a focus on Indigenous education, land and water justice, restorative practice, traditional ecological knowledge, and environmental sustainability. Her international experience includes work with Indigenous women's cooperatives in Guatemala, leading educators and students for decolonization travel seminars to Namibia, Guatemala, Mexico, and Bolivia. During her work with Bolivia, Roxanne facilitated a 3-year agreement with Bolivia's Ministry of Decolonization and the Phillips Indian educators to work collaboratively on issues of climate change, education, health, well-being, and culture. Her community work includes serving as founder of the Indigenous Women's Water Sisterhood and co-founder of the Bedote Learning Center, a place-based Dakota and Ojibwe language immersion school. She also serves on the governing council of Makoche Kikchupi, a Dakota Land Justice Project, as founder and elder council member for Dream of Wild Health, a Native Food Sovereignty Project, and on the Indigenous Roundtable for the Science Museum of Minnesota. And now please join me for welcoming our guest speakers to the stage. Thank you.
Bonjour, Nindinaway Maganaduk. Excuse me, excuse my voice. We're going to begin with introducing ourselves in our languages, and then we're going to look at a slideshow from Courtney and from Katie, from Dr. Beane. Katie was one of my students, so it's such an honor to be on this stage with her. I remember her as this young girl, and now she's Dr. Beane. So, and what an honor to be here with Courtney, such an amazing critical artist in this time, so Indigenous artist. So, bonjour, Nindinaway Maganaduk, Biidabinokwe Indigenous Cause, Gichiwikwendang Anishinaabe, Indao, Pashabitown Nindunjaba, Maukwa Nindudame. And what I said was, my name is, greetings all my relatives. I'm Grand Traverse Bando Dawan Ojibwe from a village called Pashabitown in Michigan. And I am Bear Clan. I am also a mother and a grandmother, so I'm considered an elder in my community. And I'm an educator, 40 years as an educator. So.
Tabutni, thank you. My name is Courtney Michelle Leonard. I'm from the Shinnecock Nation of Long Island, New York, and I am honored to be here today. Also, kind of want to acknowledge that our community has been working on our language revitalization for about 10 years or so now, and I think that holds space with our conversation tonight and the importance of language and the effects of imposition. So, tabuni.
Hamitakepi, Kate Beane Makiapi, Ishkiamachiankapi, Ahedipuendeme. Hello, my relatives. In English, I'm known as Dr. Kate Beane, or Katie, to a lot of my relatives. In Dakota, I'm known as Ahedipiwe, brings them home woman. And I come from Barewa Kantuan and Wahbetuan, Dakota. I come from the Barewa village, Heata Otue, as well as Kaposia, as well as Black Dogs village. All beautiful village sites along bodies of water here in the Twin Cities. And I'm just really glad to be here today. I'm the mom of 3 little girls, a little tired today because I have a baby and a puppy. I don't know why. But I am excited to be here in community and appreciating the Wiseman and Alejandra and everyone here for putting this together and being in community with such powerful, wonderful women.
So, you all came here to hear. Louder? Okay, can you hear? Okay, so I want to say thank you for coming, Jimigwetch for coming. And you came here to hear Courtney and Kate, so I'm going to let them begin and then we'll open it up. I have some questions and we'll also open it up to you to answer or ask some questions as well. So please begin.
Okay, so I'm a visual artist. I guess what I want to say is I speak through images, and so I'm going to just share a little bit of who I am, where I come from, and what brought me here today in a lot of different ways. So I said that I'm from the Shinnecock Nation of Long Island, New York. Our reservation's on the east end of Long Island. Shinnecock translates in English to people of the level land or people of the water. So we're water, shore, ocean people. And language is important in this kind of journey that I'm on. And I kind of came to this understanding of the effects of language maybe 20 years ago, or probably longer. But I was asked usually artists are asked for a title of the work, and I'm often thinking about place and my relationship to home, and sometimes missing home and what that means for me. And I'm often making home sometimes. It's just something about my level of comfort or understanding in relationship to what I'm seeing happening around me. But the word that I've been holding space with for about 10 years now is this word breach. And I came to that word for a lot of different reasons as an Indigenous person. But I thought about English as a language of imposition and how I don't have the ability to speak my fluid language at this point in time. And so what does it mean to give so much power to a language of imposition versus speaking the language that you're from, if you have the ability to do so? So breach is an English word, and sometimes in language, one word can mean multiple different things. And we often don't give the weight to words in acknowledging all of their different meanings and definitions. So breach is an imposition of law, it's a breach of contract, it's a physical breach. I love sometimes thinking through language and words that can have multiple sensorial experiences. And then breach for myself as being a Shinnecock person also relates to our relationship to whales as kind of our kin and relatives along the Atlantic Ocean in terms of their migratory path from Florida, where they usually calf, down in the Gulf, and then up our way. They're usually around March, April, going up towards the Bay of Fundy to feed. And that's kind of our timeline of knowledge and relationship to the whale. But the whale it breaches, and it's one of those other definitions of what you see above or below the sightline of water. So I think I started to think about that in relationship to visibility and invisibility, and then also how sometimes in this path and this work of BREACH, I knew early on that there were certain voices that were being heard in conversations of water issues and climate effects, but not everyone gets a voice at the table sometimes. A whale, somehow, everybody likes a whale. I don't think you would disagree, maybe. So the whale sometimes in the work of BREACH acts as a metaphor for, and I don't want to homogenize indigeneity. We're all respectfully from different communities and nations, but people sometimes are inclined to save a whale more so than they will an indigenous person. And so BREACH started in 2014, and my community members our knowledge of whales was what brought many of our community members to be hired on during the Yankee whaling industry, and some of my relatives were a part of that work. And when they were on those tall ships, they would keep an account or a logbook for the bankers that would invest in those expeditions to hunt the whales. So that's where the word logbook comes about. BREACH is the front of the conversation. The logbooks are my yearly witnessing of an account from year to year. And then I do my best to try to translate that into layered work and conversations. So this image here is of my daughter. So I am a mother and a wife and daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter. But this piece is my translation of concrete orbs that are often placed along coastal areas for coastal restoration projects. And I fashioned it out of clay. I coiled it. And I was making this work when we were living in New Mexico. We were living there for about 10 years. Both my husband and I are artists, and our alma mater is the Institute of American Indian Arts, and I had taught there for a bit. And so the clay that I used is from New Mexico, and New Mexico used to be an ocean in terms of the geological time. And I found comfort in hiking with my daughter and seeing the mica, and also remembering the mica along the shoreline back home. And so I often been thinking about material and place when I'm creating layered work. This is my home. Well, it's a picture, a map of my home. So just to give you a little bit of reference to Long Island, or if I want to be super New York, then it's Long Island, New York. So that's where I'm from. And the shape of Long Island sometimes is often references like the body of the whale. And then as you go out towards the tail of the whale where it forks, our reservation is on the South Fork of Long Island, and then the upper point, the farthest tip is, that's Orient Point. Lower tip, farthest tip is Montauk. So that's the farthest east you can pretty much go in the States. And I just share that with you because not many people are familiar with Eastern communities, and that's also aligned with like conversations about water. Is we're water people. Sometimes people generalize indigeneity and water issues, and they're not often there for the full conversation in terms of like their home and their relationship. Issues that we're facing are rising waters. Really, right now, it's hard to do this work because it's actually like a living experience. But we've had a lot of nor'easters, big storms, and so floods are coming up on our shoreline. My grandma's allotment on the res is right by Shinnecock Bay. And so if we got a hurricane category 6, it would cover over 3/4 of our reservation. So what fixed lands we have currently, it's not our traditional lands. We're fortunately to not have been like relocated, but we're more in a summer area versus our pre-colonization. We would be more inland. It just doesn't make sense to live by the water in the winter time. And then other things that I'm observing, so that was Hurricane Sandy when it breached over Dune Road into like an abandoned home area. The Hamptons border our reservation, so it's a really weird dichotomy of wealth. And then the other image over here is of my research into marine ecology and marine biology. So that is a coastal restoration project initiative that's often done with rebar steel, and they send electric to the rebar as a calcium attraction for coral growth. So the previous piece I showed you is called Artifice, and some of the work that's here at the Wiseman is also part of the Artifice series. And I'm just thinking about man-made imposition and impact and the artificial man-made runoff and pipes. And I think that it's ironic that we are the ones that are hurting our areas as humans. And then we're often asking nature to fix itself by placing these ironically developed man-made artificial structures. We're kind of like, okay, we acknowledge we don't have a coastline. Here you go, figure it out, Earth. It's not the other way around. And then those materials that we're using are often foreign materials to that place. So steel, pipes, plastic pipes, just foreign materials. So there's, and then the concrete is also kind of absurd. The previous piece was on a bed of sand because you need sand to make concrete, and then you're putting concrete on a shoreline to protect a shoreline. So there's a lot of irony in how people are trying to do work. So the exhibition here was an invitation in conversation of ceramics and contemporary artists, and I am one of 3 artists in Ebb and Flow. I share that with you to acknowledge kind of another, how I came to be here today with all of you, and then also where I'm from. So the title of the work is BREACH Logbook 23 Cull. And every logbook is according to the previous year. So in 2022, I had installed back home, close to my reservation at Stony Brook University, BREACH Logbook 22 Cull. And I was looking at how Sylvia Earle, who's a marine biologist, has been working on Mission Hope, blue hope spots throughout the world that are water spaces or ecological spaces that are having a healthy return. So we need to acknowledge these hope spots and hope that we will continue to have those healthy areas moving forward. In 2022, Shinnecock Bay was designated a Mission Hope spot through Sylvia Earle's project work. And that was really interesting for me because I felt like even though this good work is being done, us as Shinnecock people, we've been there the whole time, and we also have an oyster hatchery, and we also have our own environmental department, and often in the work of acknowledgement, there are still people that are not being acknowledged in their work of protecting place. But I was thinking about oysters, and I don't have a lot of time to teach a lot, but oysters are a natural filtration of water, but it's something we also consume and eat as Shinnecock people. So there are certain seasonal times with the water issues that we're having that we can't eat our shellfish because of toxins that they're filtering in the bay. So the shape of some of the abstractions that I do in installations is a way for me to talk about place, environment, memory, and the shapes here are taking the shape of the oyster shell. Now, where do you get oysters from? You eat them, and you gather them from the water, but then you eat them, and you can just eat them raw if it's good water. If it's not good water, you can get pretty sick, and norovirus and different things like that sometimes are in shellfish. But the process of getting to create work is a lot, at least in the way that I work. I sometimes make clay, make the glazes. But this is my daughter and I at Stony Brook University at their shell middens through their marine ecology work. They're using the shells as a part of their coastal restoration project work. and they offered the opportunity for us to go, because the shell heaps were just large and plentiful there, to go and gather the shells, and then we had to clean them. I don't know if you've ever had to clean things, but I am appreciative of my daughter, and it's also hopefully good memories. But we spent some time gathering, cleaning, and preparing the shells for the installation. Colors are important to me when I do installations. I'm often relating the colors to place or memory of place. So the green color field in the abstraction that I created for Cull in 22 was looking at an aerial kind of extracted view of the harbor, the ports, as it's going into Shinnecock Bay, but specifically where Stony Brook, Somas, Oceanic Center is. And then that's just an old, it's a duck hunt blind. And so just to give you a little bit of reference to things that you might see where I'm from, and the green and the colors. This is us cleaning, so she lives a good life. And this is my grandma's place on our res. I lived there after I graduated from grad school, and a little bit before, but my dad's a retired Air Force, so I've lived a lot of different places. But when I lived there, it's a 12 by 17 cabin, and at the time I lived there before I went to grad school and was saving money and stuff. No running water, no electricity until about 5 years ago. So just to give you an idea of when you live on a res, it's hard to get home. It's starting to change, but you can't get home loans or funding. So what you're able to do is what you're able to do out of your own pocket. So when these storms come, the nor'easter that came in January, it filled 6 inches above this deck that my daughter's sitting on. And then we have to replace the electric or all of that again. Import and export of goods, I think it's an important thing to think about what is our responsibility collectively to place. So the question that I pursue in BREACH is, can a culture sustain itself when it no longer has access to the environment that fashions that culture? I'm sharing this image. This is actually out in California in Tongva territory, and I had done an exhibition called Intermodal, thinking about the intermodality of import and export in our systems. And then these are some of the my variations of fish baskets or amplifications, like amplifiers, when I was doing that installation. Shells, I'm going to talk a little bit about shells. That's kind of what brought me to the river here a little bit, and thinking about my being new to Minnesota at the time. Quahog shells are purple and white that was used in what you may have some knowledge to in wampum and treaty belts. The actual shell, the purple and white of the shell that was fashioned into the beads for those treaty and nation relationships, it only grows in the coastal territories of New England area. So in terms of visibility and invisibility, when being taught about Indigenous histories, or specifically wampum and wampum belts and treaties, people often don't ask, where did the shell come from? That automatically acknowledges my community is Shinnecock, Wampanoag people, Narragansett, Pequot, all of us are from those shell areas. So shells have shell fragility. When there's bad water acidification, the shells get brittle. So I often think about what's the future of our community having this continued relationship to our spiritual relationship to the shell. If the shell is becoming a brittle shell, can we still fashion it into beads and use it for our community? For this piece, it's a 4-foot by 8-foot canvas that I made 3,000 thumbprints. It's called Contact 2023. And the thumbprints are made out of porcelain, kind of relating to trade and whatnot. The porcelain's from Aotearoa, from Kaolin, from over that way. But I was invited to map out home. So this is Long Island mapped out in 3,000 of my thumbprints stitched onto the canvas. That's my great-grandmother, Blanche Eliezer Carl. So some of the thumbprints, and thinking about contact and physical contact and presence, and our shells always being a part of what we would wear standing on our shores before contact in colonization. And then this is our Shinnecock Bay, which along with being here in Minnesota, when we moved here from New Mexico has the land of enchantment and beautiful skies, and it is beautiful. But people were like, "You're moving to Minnesota. What are you doing?" And I, yeah, but they were like, how's it? And as soon as we got here, and we moved here during the pandemic in the fall of 2020, I saw the red-winged blackbirds, I saw herons, I saw egrets, I saw home, and I also saw really beautiful skies. This place it's really beautiful. So we came in the fall of 2020, and we were a bit invited in conversation about some of the work that's being done in and around, and I want to ask my friend the name of this St. Anthony. I don't want to say that word. So I was, yeah. So we were invited as artists to talk about some of the public artwork that is coming into that place. But we really wanted to be mindful that we're not from here. So we wanted to be a part of a conversation that we could support, but not necessarily take place or take space. In that conversation, they shared about the lock and dam being opened up, and that it might be a good time to go down and see the river in its truth. And so when talking about artificial and then the truth, we often are changing the truth of place. And so the pandemic, it was really hard for all of us. I think we've moved really fast, not remembering what we've gone through. But we were really mindful as a family to just stay home, stay put, and if we were going to go out, being outside was okay for us. I like to venture off on walks, so that's my daughter and I climbing down into the lower part of the Mississippi River, and then my husband and all of us at the top. And there were so many people that came to look at the river. But for me, I felt like it was offering me an understanding of coming to, what does it mean to come to Minnesota? And it smelled like a funky smell that I knew from home. And I was like, where does that funky smell? And then sometimes if you watch the birds are real smart. So they'll fly down and they'll pick up what you think is a rock, and then they'll smash it on a rock, and it's shells. And I knew that from back home on my res, on our shoreline. Seagulls get a bad rap. They're sometimes referred to as flying rats, but seagulls have taught me a lot of things, and they'll dive down, pick up the quahog shell, and then drop it on the rock. And then in your baddest days, you can walk along the shoreline and just be blessed with what's around you. And the birds were doing that day. It's hard to tell your shells here a little bit because they really do look like rocks. But I wasn't really familiar with freshwater mussel shells. I mean, I knew about freshwater mussel shells, but I'd not seen them in a river in freshwater. But that's what that was. And this kind of coming to place led to my variation of BREACH Logbook 23 Cull. But this is the aerial view of the place, so I was trying to abstract a couple of the islands. I went up to Boom Island with my daughter. Where we live, I came here to teach at St. Olaf College, so we're about 45 minutes south of the Twin Cities. And the area is it used to be all woods, so like passenger pigeons, the history of that, the deforestation of the area, the Boom Island was a big part of that history. I don't want to teach too much of the history of this place, as I'm also still learning of that, so that's a part of this conversation, so I'll just keep moving. But I do a lot of research, and I just wanted to look up what's going on here in Minnesota, what's going on with the rivers. I was also, because I teach ceramics at St. Olaf, a little nervous about ceramics in Minnesota. It's got this history of a good history, but very atmospheric firing, wood kilns, soda kilns, like so. So if you know ceramics, then you might know what I'm talking about. But instead of trying to change the place, I wanted to embrace the place. So I've been actively including soda firing because it's something here in my research. And soda and salt firing were a part of the first colonial infrastructure of red clay bricks and red clay pipes and things like that. So this is my version of both a log and a pipe and the artifice form of kind of the shoreline restoration. But minks were deeply affected by the contamination in the rivers here. I'm familiar with contamination back home, but I'm still learning about what's going on here. Coming in the fall of 2020, during the pandemic and the virus being spread and people still learning about corona virus, they had culled in Europe mink furs, furrier areas, because of their concern for them spreading the disease. So I just thought about how Indigenous people, we hunt, we gather, and we use pretty much all of the materials in a lot of different cultural ways. So what does it mean to destroy all of that being and material and everything? Those were some questions I had. Climate issues, coming to a place that is known to be cold, and but it's been warm in different ways the 4 years that I've been here. But during the pandemic, the Minnesota Zoo didn't have an option to transfer their muskox, and so they culled them because of their concerns of the heat and temperature in the summertime. So those were a couple of things I was receiving about place. This is just to give you some knowledge of the freshwater mussel shell industry related to the button industry and the harvesting of shells and those middens. This is taking of the, making those buttons out of the shells. And you can just kind of see the abundance and the mass. So a lot of history of place, and a lot you can learn from just going for a walk, and then also being with the people from that place. The work in the exhibition includes mink. I met someone off eBay and got a stole, and I deconstructed it. And when I was taking it apart, a mink stole, I was really fascinated by how the stitching was kind of a map on the back of the stole, and it talked about like the stamps of the furrier and the time. And so I deconstructed and reconstructed it so that it would flow out of the pipes. So there was a relationship to our water runoff and the effects of mink and the shells. And that was fun, because I haven't beaded in a long time. I get real busy with things, and those are the things I remember doing growing up that I loved, being around family. And so sometimes I have to learn to pause. The shape that is in the cove here, I also was really honored to have the opportunity to work in this space because the walls are not straight. And I was interested in how to map place in relationship to a building that has this movement and then is along the river. And so Minnehaha Falls had a drought just last fall. And so that area is an abstraction of the falls. It's also an abstraction of the river as it flows to the Gulf of Mississippi. And the oysters are in there. So it's freshwater mussel buttons and oysters, virginica oysters from the Gulf. So thinking about that upriver, downriver relationship. And this is the work, and this is now the most important conversation, because I think it's important, if you're gonna learn about a people, you need to learn from the people themselves. And I was really tired growing up that someone else was always speaking about our community and our place, and they didn't invite us to the table. So I got a chance to meet Dr. Kate Beane through the community here, and also had admired deeply our coming to Biidabinokwe. And I just, I wanted to to offer space so that we can all learn together in conversation. Yeah.
Oh, Pidamaya, that was beautiful. I learned a lot. My family, we were deeply involved in the name restoration at Biidabinokwe. As I had mentioned earlier, we come from Heato'otu'e, village to the side there. And I teach a class here at American Indian Studies, an entry-level class. And just the other day when I was teaching, or last night actually, when I was teaching, we were talking about the ways in which Dakota village sites are usually in proximity to the river. And Heato'otu'e is one of those village sites that's a little bit further off, and that's why it's called village to the side, because it's to the side of the river. But we come from numerous village sites, and for us, I think, I come from a family that was removed from this area, that didn't have the opportunity to grow up here. And so I've always had this sort of difficult relationship with home. If you read the book Minnesota Makoche, The Land of the Dakota, Gwen Westerman and Bruce White, Gwen, I know it's a line she wrote because she's a poet. We all worked on that book together, and there's a particular line where she talks about just how many words in the Dakota language mean home. And I can't remember the exact number, but given that I was given the name Ahadipiwin brings them home woman, Hadi is to return home. And I've really taken it to heart and trying to understand what is it that brought my family home, and what does it mean to come home? Coming from a reservation outside of Minnesota in South Dakota, the first image is a picture of my twin sister, my Chekpa, Carly Bedharpel, and our dad, Sid Beane. And our dad was born and raised on his reservation in Flandreau, South Dakota. And our family ended up at Flandreau because the 26 families that lived at Heato'otu'e, those same 26 families, found each other after the war, after we'd been imprisoned. And we came back together at Santee, Crow Creek and Santee. Our families were able to reconnect. And then we weren't happy with the injustices and what was happening within those spaces at Santee in particular. And so our family, once the men came back and found the women and the elders and the children after the war, we set out walking. And we walked back home towards Minnesota. Those same 26 families that lived at Heato'otu'e, that lived at Biidabinokwe, started walking home. And we walked until we found a bend in the river, which was called Wakpai Paksha, bend in the river, and that's Flandreau, South Dakota. And if you've ever been near Pipestone, near Flandreau, it's right on the border, because we couldn't cross the border. There were still bounties on our heads, but we got really close. And that's how we ended up in Flandreau at that bend in the river. And I always think about that because I grew up hearing stories about that river, about that home, but not really understanding, okay, that was home, but it wasn't where we were from. And it was really returning home here to Minnesota later in life as an adult, and understanding our relationship here to home, that I realized that it was the water that brought us home. And that our family was on that path towards coming home, and we got as close as we could. And all these years later, my family was able to finally return home to Minnesota. And one of the first places our father took us to was Biidabinokwe, which at the time was called Lake Calhoun. And my twin sister and I, we've had a lot of conversations over the years in terms of what not growing up in our homelands, how it's impacted us. Being people who were always raised learning about other people, learning about manifest destiny, seeing the imagery out there and the ways in which our families and communities and stories and ways of life are misinterpreted and misrepresented. And when we first went to Biidabinokwe, which wasn't, we called it, our community here called it Biidabinokwe, but it was called Lake Calhoun at the time. It was the first time in my life I ever felt like I was at home. And I'd lived all over the country. I traveled all over, did a lot of odd jobs, living all over the place. And it was weird to me that for some reason, that for the first time in my life, I was like, oh, this is what people talk about. This is that feeling. And it was the water. And when I think about that connection, and I think about our connection to Heato Otunwe because of our village site history there, and predating that particular village, and our relationship to the river in particular, it's really, really strong connection. It feels, I always describe it, it feels like a magnet. My family, we lived, my husband and daughters and I, we lived in South Minneapolis near the riverway until just a couple years ago. We lived near the river. And then we moved, and I really, really miss it. And it has nothing to do with being in the city or the suburbs or, or anything. We don't see this landscape that way. I don't see the boundaries of the colonizer. Like I see where our village sites were. To me, those are the boundaries, is the village sites. And being close to those village sites, being close to the river is incredibly important. But these are some images that show the process that we went through for the restoration, the name restoration of BREACH, which was a difficult process. The top picture is my sister with her son, Cull. He was the first in our family to be born back at a birthing center overlooking the lake. My last daughter was born at that same birthing center, and my second daughter learned to walk at the lake. And so, it's taken a lot of years for our family to come full circle and to be a part of this place. On the bottom corner, you'll see two of my daughters when they were a little bit younger at BREACH at the public art there. Angela Two Stars is here, one of the phenomenal artists that helped create that public art with Sandra Spieler and Mona Smith. And they're sitting where it says, Dayan Yahi, welcome. And they love going to BREACH. They actually were very involved in the process of the name restoration. And for me, it's about helping them understand the relationship to the water and the relationship to these places, which we do through public art, which we do through storytelling, which we do through expressing who we are and telling our own stories within these spaces. And it's important for them to understand that. When I was teaching about St. Anthony Falls, about Owamani the other day, I was talking about, I had my students go to different sacred sites around the Twin Cities, and they went to Miniowesni, they went to Owamani, they went to Dakuwakantipi, they went to Badote, and I wanted them, their assignment was to listen and to smell and to hear and to think about what it was like, what it felt like being there, and to figure out what did they learn also in terms of the interpretive signage. What did it tell them about these places? And what was the involvement of Dakota people? And the hope is that we continue to change what is within these spaces so that when people visit these spaces, they have a better understanding of the longer history, and they have a better understanding of the longer connection that we as Dakota people have with these places as well. St. Anthony Falls is one of those places that a lot of times people don't realize that Owamani used to be right at Badote, thousands of years ago. That is our site of creation. The land moved, and that's a very sacred space. Spirit Island there is a very sacred space where women used to go to give birth to our babies. And it's still there, it's still under the water, you just can't see it. And there's so much that's still there that most people don't see. When I see BREACH, I see it covered in wild rice. I see the wild artichokes, I see the strawberries, I see the things that we had always, the things that always nourished us within these spaces. It's still there for us, and we still respect it and honor it. But when I was talking about St. Anthony Falls, Owamani, with my students, we were talking about the painting at the state capitol of Father Hennepin discovering St. Anthony Falls. And one of my students said, why did they say that he discovered St. Anthony Falls? And because, the story is that it was a group of Dakota people that showed him where the falls was. And I said, well, yeah, it was a group of Dakota people who showed him where the falls were, and he was there to tell a story. And he told that story, and he profited off of it. And And he sold that story. But he also sold that story saying that he was a prisoner, but he came back. And when I was doing research on my grandfather, Charles Eastman, for my dissertation in order to understand our longer family history, I came across some of his unpublished writings where he talked about Father Hennepin and that group of Dakota people, because I didn't know this at the time, but in his unpublished papers, I found out that it was our family that showed him where Oamani was. And it was a relative of ours, Akipakte, who was the leader. We had a name. Like, we even remember the names of the people who were there. But in these paintings and in these representations, there's just these lies. There's these stories that aren't true, and these representations of us that aren't accurate. And I'm really proud of the fact that in my community now, we have some wonderful organizations who are doing some really hard work to take these lands back, to restore these lands, to change the narrative. Worked hard. I was on the State Emblem Redesign Commission for the new state flag and the state seal. And who knew that the most contentious meeting would be because I proposed adding the words Minnesota Makoche to the seal. That was incredibly contentious. There are people fighting it. And they're saying it's because Minnesota Makoche, that term in the middle of the seal, they're saying that legally it can't be there because within the seal, only official emblems of the state can be there. I don't know how much more official you can get. But it's important to know those things. Minnesota Makoche, the land of the Dakota, the land where the waters reflect the sky. You know, water is a part of our state name. It is so incredibly important here. You know, if it were up to me, the state flag would be Prince riding a loon with laser eyes, but that's not going to happen. So, you know, I think honoring that water is incredibly important. As you mentioned, we have these beautiful skies, we have these beautiful waterways, and there's so much that we can learn in connecting with these things here in our homelands. And it's absolutely imperative that we do our homework and we find out more about those connections. And we as Dakota people are here to help share some of that knowledge.
Chimigwech. Let's give them a round of applause. That was amazing. It's such an incredible honor to share this stage with Kate as an important Dakota scholar and historian here in her homeland, and with you, Courtney, as a visitor, an Indigenous visitor, and both as amazing critical scholars, and to the Wiseman. Thank you, Chimigwech, for making space for us to tell these stories tonight. I have a few questions, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I think we talked about the questions prior to coming here. So in some of those you've answered. It's first I want to start with acknowledging that this building, this campus, sits on the second largest river in the United States, the fourth largest river in the world. Everybody always thinks the Mississippi is the largest. It's actually the Missouri River, which is the largest, but I always think of it as a tributary of the Mississippi. But you know, there are millions and millions of people that rely upon this river for life. You know, water is our first medicine. It's our first home, and then although this water has traditionally been so abundant in this place, the health of this water is declining rapidly because of development, climate chaos, and poisoning from farm runoffs, industry, road salt, colonization. My question is, and you've kind of answered, both of you have answered this, but I'd like for you to elaborate a little bit more. How has your people's relationship with your waters changed because of colonization, and how does your work and your life journey reflect this change?
So I just would like, I think I just want to say colonization is still happening, and it's a deep part of kind of thinking about, what brought me to Minnesota versus bringing me closer to home. I think sometimes I've witnessed that it's hard for people to face their past and their present and their future. And so sometimes it's easier to invite Indigenous people who are from farther away to be here than to engage with the people from the place. It's just something I'm sharing in terms of like, I'm appreciative of being able to teach. I love working with community and younger generations. But I also question, why me and why here? And it's something I've seen. So it's like back home, there are people that are working in universities and colleges there that are Indigenous. They're not from there. So it's just one of those things. And I think it's tied to water because of the effects of rising waters. It's hard for me to think about what home means for me right now. For whatever reason, we came here. We have a home in Minnesota now, and I'm really appreciative of that, to have a home. But I also don't know what home means sometimes. And it's also hard to be away from my relatives and to be away when the waters rise and my mom's trying to pick up the stuff. I wish I could be there sometimes to help her out. I think I shared a couple other things in what I shared, so I'm just gonna kind of keep it short. We're still in a time of colonization. There's still a lot going on, and water allows me to breathe a little bit. It's a place I go to for prayer, wherever I am, and I'm just trying to do the best I can with the time I have in the best way I can. So yeah.
So when I think about water, when I think about the riverways, I was taught that the rivers are the veins of Mother Earth, and what it comes down to, it's all about connection, and instead of thinking about all the things that divide us, what are the links, what are the connections? Like I said, I don't see the borders of the state of Minnesota. I teach at the University of Minnesota, and I'm the executive director of the Minnesota Museum of American Art, and I've had a lot of conversations about what is American and what is Minnesota. And I see it more as a regional, local regional focus because these borders aren't ours. And I do see the riverways sort of as territorial borders, and it's a different way of seeing the land and of understanding our history. And because of my background and really spending a lot of time researching and understanding the history of our family's time here in Minnesota, and really diving into the world of public history, because of that background, I know this place. And I always wonder, like, why am I, how did I get to be the executive director of an art museum? Like, I come from a family of artists, but I had no idea what field I was gonna go in, and I kind of got drawn into the art world, and it was a natural pull. And it was because of the water, and it was, when I think about the museum that I'm leading now, it's right near the river. And when I think of the work I've done on the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board, I was appointed to that board because I knew the history of the Capitol before the Capitol. And I understood that connection to the place. And I understood how the importance of representation of wider representation of who we are as a state and region within the capital city, and the role that the riverway played in the transference of knowledge, in the transference of goods, and the fact that the riverway actually has acted as as that ultimate connector between people. And it's important to understand and listen to the earth in terms of, and our relatives, our water relatives, to know that there's a lot of knowledge there to be shared with us so that we can understand the situation that we're in, the places where we're in. We have to look beyond that development to really begin to find the answers of where do we go next. Because we're in a time of crisis. You know, this has been a really off winter, and it worries me, and it worries a lot of us. And we know that in order to figure out how do we respond to it, how do we help ensure that, you know, our grandchildren's grandchildren will be able to enjoy these waters and these places like we do, we have to listen to the earth. We have to go back, and we have to find that connection again.
Yes, water is life. Do we want to go to a question from the audience, and then I'll come back to one of my questions, or how do you want to do that? Do you want to go back and forth? Okay, let's see let's see if there's a audience question that we can put out there. I think they're doing it this way. So.
Yeah, so the first question that came up is for Courtney. Your work often involves a tedious process, thinking about the thumbprints or delicate ceramic baskets. What draws you to this way of working?
The earth. Sorry. So, no pun intended, but clay grounds me. Like, it just allows me to be. Like I get nervous or I feel lost sometimes. There's just something about being with clay that always kind of brings me to, okay, we're here together and let's see where we go. And so I also respect clay a lot, and it's a part of like I don't like to feed Indigenous stereotypes, but I'm just gonna say, like, our relatives get buried into the earth, and then we are able to be blessed and gifted with clay to manifest into new things. There's a lot of responsibility in decision making of those relationships, but I think that to keep it short, because I can go on and on, but clay grounds me. It affords a lot of opportunity to think. I think of clay as a fellow human. I mean, not a human, clay is clay, but I just feel like we're in relationship and I'm listening, and you can only do so much with clay when it tells you, like, I'm good. And I think that's the same thing for being with other humans. And I also think about, like, in my material choices, clay can't do everything, and I'm not asking clay to do it all. And I think that's the other thing, too, about my understanding of being present, is I wouldn't ask somebody to hold up all the responsibility and all the ways of translating and being in conversation. And so that's where some other of the other materials, like, come into play. Also, clay is something I have access to. So if I don't have access to things because of imposition of law, like the ivory of a sperm whale tooth, I can fashion it out of clay. If I don't have access to the shells because they're brittle, I can fashion them out of clay. There's something about what I have access to and what I don't have access to, and thinking about futurity that also kind of brings me to thinking through that relationship with clay.
Thank you. Yeah, you just answered 2 questions, so yeah. Go ahead.
And then I'll go ahead and ask one of our questions, and then we'll just go back and forth, okay? Okay. I feel that way about gardening. Yeah, exactly. The next question deals with erasing historical memory. and it's really for both of you. Okay. Raising historical memory has long been a tool used by colonization. Can you explain how your work addresses this erasure and brings to light those things that have been buried or hidden for so long?
I have a hard time thinking of how what I do doesn't do that because of a lot of the different things I'm involved in. But I got into the museum field because I started spending a lot of time in the archives. I didn't go to graduate school with the intention of getting a doctorate degree, with the intention of making a career. If you remember, I was trying to figure out what to do, and I was inspired by you and your worldly travels, and I went to New Zealand, and I studied at Auckland Uni, and was adopted by a beautiful Maori family that actually worked at Maori television, and was really inspired by that experience. But what I realized is I went through a period of grieving when I was in Auckland, and I had to figure out why I was so sad, being so far away from home, being far away from my family. And part of what I was grieving was the fact that Barnes and Noble had like Maori language books, and they had Maori television. They had all these things, and I understood how hard what it took to get there. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking they're 15% of the population. Native people are 1%. Dakota people are just not even accounted for. We're never going to be able to do this. And I had to get out of that mindset, and I had to realize that the only way to move forward was to be ridiculously positive, which drives my staff crazy, my kids crazy, my husband crazy. But the way I think about it is I don't have an option of being negative, because the only way to have the energy is to really think about that Dakota value of positivity, which is the hardest value to live by. That's why it's there, is to give us that strength to get through. But those archives, spending time in the library, I'm an introvert. I loved the quiet of paper and books. I love discovering my family in the archive, as sad and as hard as it is that you have to go to an archive to meet your relatives. They were there, and it's like they were waiting for me. And it was really important for me to understand how to help be their voice, because I felt like they were hidden in the basements of these institutions. And understanding how as my role as a connector between community and the objects, the artwork, the materials that museums and institutions have in our collections. How do we really think about good stewardship in terms of taking care of these items as institutions being respectful of the Indigenous and diverse communities where these pieces come from?
I'm not having a midlife crisis, I don't think, but I'm questioning sometimes like where I started and where I am now. And when I was in college, I wanted to go to art school, but I was supposed to be the first doctor in my family. So then I was like, oh, I'll take museum studies, so my family will be okay with my choice making. And I actually really liked the museum studies program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and it taught me a lot about memory and power, and what gets seen and what doesn't get seen. And when I was 18 going into 19, I did an internship at the National Museum of the American Indian in Suitland, Maryland, working with the collection. And I've always been sometimes given an assignment to like look up Shinnecock and write a paper about look up your family, like it's for everybody. So if you're Irish or whatever, look it up and write a paper. When you looked up Shinnecock, we would often be written out of history as if we all died. And there's a particular event that did occur, the Circassian ship that sometimes where our men had died as they were forced by gunpoint to unload the cargo ship, that when those men had died, that our whole community had died. And I struggled with that because I was a young person, and I'm like, I'm still here. And then when people would go to speak, like up here, they would speak for us. We were never up here to speak for ourselves. So at NMAI and in the Smithsonian, I looked up Shinnecock, and we had scrub brushes, we had wampum, we had different things in there, but not something that was ever brought to the surface or ever seen. I didn't think I was going to be an artist, like in that Western kind of conversation. I just had always been creating. So to keep the story short, is I did think about using museums as a space of record and documentation in the work of BREACH. And so in the beginning of the introduction, many of the museum acquisitions of the work or taking them in, I donated a lot of work just to be able to establish a record of our existence as Shinnecock people in those spaces. And then with collections being online, then the record starts to build a little bit more of representation of who we are and where we come from for our younger people that might be doing Google searches or things like that. So, so I'm just sharing that in a way. Also, and I want to say thank you to Dr. Kate Beane, because I don't think I'm super positive or connecting, and I think I want to work on that. And so I really appreciate the idea of not coming into a place so much of loss or pain, but maybe coming into a place more of positivity and healing and connection. Yeah.
Go ahead and ask another. I like how it's, yeah.
All right, talking about positivity, this is on kinship. I saw so much of that in your work, and it's always central to Kate's work as well. So kinship relationships with the natural world allowed Indigenous peoples to live in our homelands for thousands of years without causing harm. We're now in a time when we're trying to repair harms to the natural world that we did not commit. Can you share a story about how your work influenced positive change?
I think one simple way I think of addressing it is we changed the comment section of the Star Tribune. When we first started doing the work around the name restoration of BREACH, you know, and it has, I mean, there are certain elements that have not changed, will never change. There will be keyboard warriors hiding in their grandmother's basements for eternity. But I think one thing that I learned is that, you know, these people who attack us and are so ugly, you know, and who create this story that is just so destructive, well, not only do they not know what they're talking about, but they don't expect a response, and they don't want a response. They never speak directly to us. I used to work at the Historical Society. Every single person in the leadership team would get a letter about how much they despised my work, except for me. But I would get shown it, and then I would be the one that would have to help draft the response. But what I noticed in the comment section during the BREACH work, and what I've noticed during other things, I try really hard not to read it anymore, but what I noticed is that the responses started to change. And all of the public education that we were doing, because we spent a lot of volunteer time in the evenings, our family did, to educate different churches and community groups and neighborhood groups and organizations and schools. And we spent so much time educating. What I started to see is some of that information making its way back into the comment section, and people were armed with knowledge. And we started to actually see that narrative change. And it was a really beautiful thing to see.
I would just say it was really beautiful for us as like our family, my husband's Onondaga and Nez Perce, and then I'm Shinnecock, and my daughter's Shinnecock, and to come to a place where we could hear Biidabinokwe, like to come to a place where still learning of the place, but all of the positive work is the work that's being done by the people here, and you're a part of that work, and a lot of people are a part of that work, and I just feel when we came here that was really beautiful to receive. It was also a really hard time because of the murder of George Floyd and coming to this place at a very volatile time, and also coming to a place where you're going to teach with students who don't have face-to-face contact, but for the art department, we were having face-to-face studios. So I think the positivity is already happening, and then for myself, it's hard for me in the work that I do to not be feeling drowning. Like, but when my daughter comes at the end of like the journey and she is in the water in her full joy and safety, I then feel like, you know, that's the thing. That's the thing, is the remembering to hold the joy with the water, to not be afraid to go into the water, hopefully. And yeah, so language is important, and this place is actively maintaining, working towards that, and that is super positive.
Chimigwich. I just want to say a couple things about your comments. Kate, your family's work on Biidabinokwe is now inspiring some work that I'm involved with the Bassett Creek Water Commission. We're working on changing the name to the Hahawak Badan. And so we're going through this whole process of education, using your example, using the language, using the things that you put out there. And people, you're right, people that they're not native, they're not Dakota, but they've heard about Biidabinokwe, they've read about Biidabinokwe, and so they're speaking those things. It's not just me as an Indigenous person, but it's also our non-Indigenous allies that your family has helped to educate, so Chimigwech for that. And for you, Courtney, too, I think your art demands that we look and we think deeply. There's a few other artists like that you can't look away. You have to spend time and think about it's. And I loved our conversation that you said, I don't just create these pretty native pictures, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd like for you to just say something about that and why you don't do that. Because when I looked at your slides and I've listened to your story, I feel like that you're a really important, like I said, a very important and critical teacher at this time. I'm not from your homeland, but I know now more about your homeland, and I can, you know, it's all one water. It's all one water. Biidabinokwe, you know, the Atlantic Ocean, Gitchiwikwendung, which is my water. It's all one water, so we have to work together. So Chimigwech.
Yeah, it's about 7:44.
Oh.
So that
Are
was
done?
beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
We're done. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
thank
Okay.
you. Big thank you to Roxanne.
Oh, we could
Courtney,
be here. I could just sit here
Kate.
and listen
Yeah,
to these
I
guys.
wish
So
I wish
I'm
the
all-
same.
So I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions, but again, Nina Wopida Chimigwech to both of these amazing scholars, artists, activists, historians, storytellers. Let's give them a round of applause again.
Thank you.
And thank you all again for coming.
Yeah, thank you to everyone, all of our guests, and to all of you for coming to this event tonight. Please enjoy the last 15 minutes of music, and there's also, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to acknowledge, like, the most important part of the work of BREACH is the people. And the only, like, to kind of follow up on what you were closing out on, I have, like, when I first made the first contact piece, it was shown at the Museum of Art and Design, and I went to go pick up my coat from the coat check place, and there was a very stereotypical Wall Street man who was also picking up his coat. And the lady had asked, oh, were you at the Changing Hands exhibition? It was an exhibition of contemporary Native artists from the East Coast. And he said, oh no, that Native show? No, I didn't. And he grabbed his coat. And because I may not look Native, he felt very comfortable saying that in front of me when he went to get his coat. And I just thought that sometimes people don't go to the things that they don't think that they are like in connection with. So what I do, I specifically use abstraction as a way to lure people in and to see if they'll stay a while in connection and understand the value of our voices. So the most important part is like having the opportunity to be in conversation with people. Thank you so much, Dr. Kate Beane. Thank you so much, Dr. Gould. And also Eileen, Alejandra, Rosa, Diane, Reggie, Kate. There's so many people here that make the work happen. Those are the people that I want to continue to stay in touch with, and I'm very honored. And then all of you as well, thank you so much for your time tonight and coming out. I deeply appreciate it. Tabutni.
Thank you so much for that. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for all coming.